You ever wondered what the bite point setting does in iRacing? How about a step-by-step guide on how to set up your gear to use it? In this video, I'm going to cover both of these to help get you ready to perfect those great launches. All right, so the first settings that we have to look at are in the Options Drive tab. So we're going to go to Options, and it automatically comes up to the Drive tab. And what we're going to be doing is looking here, right, in the clutch area. And you'll see we've got this bite point and launch trigger. So for me, I've got my launch trigger set up on an analog paddle on my wheel. I've got the advanced paddle module from Fanatec, and it's got these two analog paddles on the bottom on either side. So that's what I'm using for mine. I just pull it in, and it's just like pushing a button. You can do the same by assigning a button to it. So for instance, if I click in here, I can just assign it to a button instead, or put it back to my paddle, my analog paddle. Now I'm going to leave the bite point here at 90%. You probably wouldn't do this in a regular race or setup or anything like that, but just to demonstrate how this sets up the clutch bite point for you from one extreme to the other. So we're going to start off with the bite point set at 90% and see what happens there. All right, so we're here in the car, and I want you to focus your attention on the clutch input here as we go through this process. So the way you would do this, and you know, I'm just going to do it without the car running, but obviously you would do this with the car running. So I'm going to push in the clutch with my foot, and you can see on the foot cam, push in the clutch with my foot, and then I'm also going to pull in the paddle that I assigned to be the launch trigger. And at this point, you know, the car would be running, I'd be in first gear, I'd have the throttle, you know, at whatever, you know, amount I wanted to be in. And what I would do then is release launch trigger. And if you notice, the clutch only released to the 90% point. And obviously it times out after a few moments, right? So I'm going to do that again here, right? So I'm going to push in the clutch. I'm going to pull in the bite point or the launch trigger, release the launch trigger, and it only drops to 90% engaged, right? And then I can let the clutch out with my foot as I need to, as I'm feeding more throttle. Okay, so that's the one extreme. So that bite point sets it to what the clutch is going to drop to as far as engagement goes, right? So now we're going to go to the other extreme, and we're going to adjust that bite point, and then we'll see the difference. All right, so here I am back in the Options tab, Options Drive tab, and I'm going to move the bite point down to just 10%. So again, this is not a setting you would probably ever use in an actual race setting, but just to demonstrate how much of a change it makes when you do adjust that bite point. So let's get back in the car. All right, so we're back in the car. So again, clutch in, launch trigger in, throttle up, launch trigger out. Notice it drops to only engage 10% of the clutch. And then of course I would let out the clutch as needed while feeding more throttle to get that launch off the line, right? So clutch in, it would be in gear 2. Launch trigger in, launch trigger out, and I'm feeding it throttle and letting the clutch out. Okay. So that shows you the extreme. So what I'm going to do now real quick is I'm going to set it to what would probably be around the normal setting and actually go through the process so you can see what that looks like. All right. So real quick, I've set my bite point to 55%. That's probably, you know, a good starting point, 50 to 55%, when you're setting up for a specific track with certain weather conditions and such. So, but we're going to jump in the car and I'm going to show you what this actually looks like and feels like when you're in the car on a race launch. All right, so we're in the car. Get it started. I've got the launch screen on the dash panel here. I am in the Ford supercar, Ford Mustang supercar. We're just at the centripetal course. So I'm going to come around so that we're actually on the starting line here. All right, that's good enough, right? All right, so here's how it would work. Right? Clutch in, first gear, launch trigger in, throttle up, launch trigger out, and go. And you notice I was feeding throttle and while letting the clutch out fully. So that's just real quick, kind of giving you an idea of what it takes to launch the supercar, or really any car, with the setting up your launch trigger and your bite point in the options setting for iRacing. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, please hit that like button. And if you'd like to see more of my content, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well. That's all for now. Until the next one, just race.